Hello again, Steve here, with a few comments that I may have said something about before, and it has to do a little bit with all this kerfuffle that's going on in the world with, you know, Americans fighting Syrians, Russians fighting Syrians, French fighting Syrians, ISIL, whoever else, Muslims, Christians, Crusades, all this that's going on. It's a bunch of nonsense for the most part, except that the bullets and the bombs are probably quite real. And it just reminds me of an old saying that I still like a lot. It was attributed to a guy that many people refer to as Guru Nanak. This is a guy who allegedly, according to his people who follow some of his stuff now, people who call themselves Sikhs, they're the followers, some in many ways, of this guy called Guru Nanak. Now, Guru Nanak, if I remember correctly, having read a little bit of the history of the Sikhs by MacLean, I think his name was, Guru Nanak was this guy who was born in, who knows what the history is, who knows if he even exists. I mean, the whole, story of all these historical figures, I don't have any evidence, just what I've read, right? A little bit of it anyway. He was a guy who was, probably a thinker of some sort anyways, and he lived in an area which is probably where the Sikhs live now, in the Punjab area of now India, and partly now Pakistan. And this was an area where the Muslim warriors were essentially trying to capture the what became known to the Europeans anyways as the Hindus. And of course the Muslims at the time were fighting with everybody, wanting to conquer because it's a warring tradition, warring religion, my understanding is. And so there was always these battles going on. There was the Hindus and the Muslims hated each other. And one of the things that I always remember that Guru Nanak said at one point is that there is no Muslim, there is no Hindu. Because people would come to him complaining, oh, the Hindus are doing this. Or the Muslims would come to him, the Muslims would say the Hindus are doing this, and the Hindus would say the Muslims are doing this. And they both liked him. Apparently, at least on his deathbed, apparently, two factions who hated each other, this so-called Muslim group and this so-called Hindu group, both laid flowers down, white flowers, apparently, for Guru Nanak. And I could be wrong on this. People may correct me on this. I'm going by memory here. But I didn't really understand, maybe I still don't understand what he meant by that, but I get the point now as far as I can see it, which is that it's true. There is no Muslim, there is no Hindu, there is no Christian, there is no Jew. All of these things are fabrications, right? They're just concocted things. It's like there is no Peter Pan, probably, right? There is no, I don't know, Donald Duck, right? I mean, there is in somebody's mind and people's creative minds and so on, but there's no empirical test that you can say and determine that there is a Donald Duck. Unless, of course, you've got a duck in your backyard and you happen to call him Donald, then yes. But still, the Donald part is just something you made up. The duck part exists. You could take a blood sample, send it off to a laboratory, and they could send that back and say, yes, in fact, that came from a duck. But we don't know his name is Donald. Now, same goes for Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, Scientologists, whatever you want to call them, Mormons. If you were to send off a blood sample to any reputable lab, send a sample to 25 different labs, my bet is that not one of them will come back and say, yes, this is a Zoroastrian. Not likely. They might say that this individual likely comes from the Indus River or comes from the Caucasus, if they do a deep enough research into the genome, but they can't empirically say this guy is a Muslim or whatever. So, what is this then? Because people will say, of course, we're Muslims, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm a this, I'm a that. But nobody can test for it. You can put a bunch of people in a lineup that could look like somebody. Somebody may look like Santa Claus, but he may not be Santa Claus, right? Santa Claus may not actually exist. It might be just somebody's ideas. And somebody dresses up as Santa Claus for 2 weeks over Christmas at the shopping mall. But they might not actually be Santa Claus. Because in fact, you could send off a sample of their blood somewhere, and it's probably not going to come back as, our findings are, this is the blood of Santa Claus. Not likely to happen. So I think it's important to bear these things in mind when we get talking about things like listening to the news. It's just so full of complete shit, right? Because there's, this Muslim or Islamic state forces are bombing this and bombing that. We really come down to it. I think it's important for us to remember all we're talking about is human beings. And we put labels on stuff, put labels on ourselves. But we could just as easily say that we're, part of Peter Pan's forces. We could say it, but people would think we're nuts. Why? Because nobody else thinks of that. But when you have a whole bunch of people who are deluded into thinking they are something, called Canadians or Americans or Russians or whatever it is, state names, religious names, group names, and so on, you can't test for it. And this is important if we want to be truthful, I think. Very important if we want to be truthful. Is that all we can say we really are is what we can prove that we are, right? Even if somebody was to say, oh, you could tell that this Islamic fighter is a Muslim because he's circumcised. Well, that is true. You could tell something, maybe. You could tell that his dick doesn't have foreskin, or doesn't have most of his foreskin on. But that doesn't mean he's a Muslim. Because after all, remember, a Muslim cannot be tested for. Oh, another thing you can say, oh, well, he knows the Quran, he can recite the Quran, he must be Muslim. Well, is it possible that somebody else, who calls himself something else, who calls himself a Zoroastrian, calls himself I forget what those Christians are called in Iraq, who speak the same language that the supposed Jesus spoke? One of the rites of the Catholic Church, what are they called now again? Chaldeans. A Chaldean, man, I knew a Chaldean, for example, he could recite the Quran. He called himself a Chaldean. Went to a Chaldean church. And he knew the Quran. Why did he know the Quran? That was his culture. That's where he grew up. He grew up in the middle of Iran. He had to know it to be able to talk to these people, to all these people around. He had to be able to, that's all they were doing. So many of these people were reciting the Quran, so he knew it as well. But he didn't claim to be a Muslim. He claimed to be a Chaldean Christian, one of the rites of the Catholic Church. And he accepted the Pope as his Holy Father. Not, whatever his name was, the Muslim guy. Not the local imam. So I think it's telling us something that when we are able to just, for a moment, hang on a second here. What was this Guru Nanak guy saying anyways? It was just people all around him fighting each other, who claimed to be Muslims and claimed to be Hindus. And he was of a group of people who were stuck in the middle, so the warring tribes were constantly going through there, parading through. And they developed eventually a martial society to ward off these constant invasions trampling through their crops. And to this day they wear a little dagger, and they call themselves Sikhs. But you can't test for a Sikh. You can't take a blood sample and it come back, empirical evidence, yes, this in fact is a Sikh. And he wears a kata on his wrist, and he wears a turban, and a certain kind of a cotton undergarment, and a beard, and a kirpan, dagger by his side. The test, blood sample, DNA sample, hair sample, none of them, as far as I know, will tell you that. So it's not what they are, right? It's just something that not just one crazy invented, but a whole bunch of people subscribe to, so it's now respectable to be crazy. That's all that these labels are, is respectable craziness that people will fight over and kill each other over. To which Guru Nanak, who probably wasn't called Guru Nanak at the time, and there was no Sikhism at the time. It was his followers who developed this, a subsequent track of gurus who found it was financially probably profitable to step into the boots of this guy after he passed away, because he created this huge following of respectability by saying, guys, drop this shit. You're both human beings. If you get rid of the Muslim story and the Hindu story and just realize the common story is that you're both brothers in a way, you don't have to fight anymore. You can help each other, cooperate maybe. I'm putting words into his mouth, but maybe that's what he was getting at. And I think it's becoming more and more important for us, because we certainly are a global village. I mean, we've got weapons that can blow up the world several times over. Surely we have to get to the point of understanding that all these labels are just concoctions. And many of these concoctions were concocted at a time when people were friggin', in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and 2,000 years ago, and talking snakes and, Abraham going to kill his son, and a guy telling me I'm the son of God and come follow me and you'll be saved. And I mean, these people weren't even in the Iron Age, as far as I know. So, and but people will invent religions, and they're just stories, as far as I can see, with a smattering of old, parables and so on that are truisms that have gone through many, many different incarnations of religion. And, to sort of legitimize them, right? But at the end of the day, there's no sense us saying that we are something that we have concocted, right? Once again, it's like us building a birdhouse. We've concocted it, right? And then turning around and saying that we are the birdhouse. No, we're not the birdhouse, it's just something we created. We're not a religion. We created a religion. And if we weren't the ones who actually created it, we maintain it. We perpetuate it based on our belief systems and our upholding and efforts into it and so on. But I think that those are some very important words that Guru Nanak had said many, many years ago to the warring tribes about him. There is no Muslim. There is no Hindu. Perhaps it was something very deep to what he was saying. I don't know. But I think no matter what there was to it, there's great value in us remembering that. We see a bunch of people fighting based on labels that I'm this and you're that. To recognize that what they're actually talking about what they are and what they are, for the most part, is nonsense. It's usually nonsense. Because what they really, really are, both, are human beings who eat the same kind of food, basically, or eat some sort of food. Both breathe air. Both want to have sex, typically, want to raise families, want to take care of their kids, want to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and want to live, for the most part. And the rest of it is all conditioning into nonsense. That you're this, and I'm that. And this and that is just friggin' Peter Pan and Donald Duck shit. Except the difference between Peter Pan and Donald Duck shit is that too often the Peter Pans and the Donald Ducks have got fucking guns and bazookas and tanks and airplanes and all this shit, and they want to steal the possessions of the ducks and the Peter Pans. Because somehow they're concocted into somehow these are evildoers and so on and so on and so on, to do all this nonsense. They want the stuff. And we have to realize that we're human beings. And if we come to that, if we focus on what we have in common, which is not our fantasies so much, but our realities, when we do that, I think we'll have a lot better chance in getting along rather than fighting. Steve here again with a few comments on what doesn't exist and how getting in touch, I think, with what does exist, which is ourselves and communication with others, can help to improve the quality of our lives in a very real way. Once again, great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.